Hello, this is Russell Moore, and you're listening to The Russell Moore Show, brought to you by Christianity Today. Every week, we explore here conversations and questions from a Christian perspective to help you sort out how to live as a follower of Jesus in confusing times. And this week, we have a conversation to seek to do just that. Jeff Goldberg is the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, moderator of Washington Week with The Atlantic on PBS. And during his editorship, The Atlantic has set new audience and subscription records. It's really incredible to see a very, very old media property, which we'll talk about in a little bit, become the magazine of record for the United States these days. And that's just not something you see very much. And we're going to explore some of it as to why and how you can evaluate what sort of media you consume. Prior to coming to The Atlantic, Jeff Goldberg wrote for The New Yorker, New York Times Magazine, Washington Post. He's the author of the book Prisoners, A Story of Friendship and Terror, and he has a new book called On Heroism, McCain, Milley, Mattis, and the Cowardice of Donald Trump. Now, we're recording this pre-election, and it will be airing post-election. So we're just going to talk in the mystery of how all of that is going to turn out. Jeff Goldberg, thanks for being with us today.
Yes, welcome to the Mysterium, as they say in the Catholic Church. Okay, thank you for having me. We're gonna try to, maybe we could just guess the future. You want to just do that?
Just talk as if, yeah.
Talk us as if everything we want to have happen happens.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Well, we're recording on October the 7th.
Yes, we are.
1-year anniversary of the Hamas attacks on Israel. And you previously served in the IDF, the Israeli military. How did you end up in that adventure in your life?
Thank you, by the way, for noting that this is the anniversary of the Hamas attack on Israel, because a lot of people I see are referring to this as the beginning of the Gaza war. And I was struck by that language because on October 7th, 2023, there was no war in Gaza. There was a war out of Gaza into Israel, and people sort of do a lot of erasing of facts that are inconvenient for them. So this is like 30... I hate to admit how old I am. This is about 36 years ago. I'm a young kid on leave from college. Still haven't gone back, by the way. I'm extending the leave into my 4th decade. And I wanted some adventure. I had grown up in a youth movement, a Jewish youth movement that was, it sounds funny now, it was a socialist Zionist youth movement, if you could believe it or not. Big movement at the time related to the kibbutz movement in Israel. And so there was a kind of inevitability to going to live in Israel for a while and see what it was like. When you live there for a while, you get drafted, and I got drafted into the Army. I didn't do that long in the Army, but wound up having a very interesting, troubling, illuminating experience working as a military policeman in a prison. This is during the first Palestinian uprising, which started in 1987, late 87. And I'm this guy from New York. I think I know a lot about the Middle East, but man, the worst mistake you can make about the Middle East is thinking you know a lot about the Middle East. And the book that I wrote, in short, is it's a narrative. It's a biographical narrative. It's about this experience. It's about my relationship to Israel and my own Jewishness. It's kind of a time capsule for me now, in a way. Everything's changed so much. But the core of the book is about all these Palestinians I got to meet in the prison. These were all like leaders of various groups. And I know it sounds strange, but it's about the friendship that I developed with one of the young Palestinians, a little younger than I was. He's today a professor in the UAE, but then he was an activist from Gaza. And there's not a lot to do in a desert prison tent camp most days. And so I turned that place into a little bit of a school for myself, trying to learn what it was that was going on in Gaza and the West Bank and who these guys were and what they wanted. I think it was a two-way street, obviously. And that's what the book is about. And this was, in retrospect, it was kind of an innocent age. This was the Palestinian uprising of rocks and Molotov cocktails and people trying to drop cinder blocks on your head. It wasn't the second uprising, which was the suicide bombings and the massacres, or what we're having now, which is sort of the third iteration, which was started with a total massacre and then became the war that we are seeing today.
Were you able in that friendship to see his perspective on what's happening in Gaza? I think there are a lot of people who would wonder, why do the Palestinians not refuse to follow such murderous, terroristic leadership in these various organizations?
Right.
How would he have explained? I know this was way pre this situation, but how would he have explained the sort of waving away of Hamas that someone
Right.
might do in his
Well,
situation?
he wasn't, this guy, I mean, I knew some of the Hamas guys in the prison, and they're interesting to talk to, a little bit different. With that level of fundamentalist, you don't have what you and I might think of as a kind of intellectually honest and open, flexible conversation, right? It's more output directed at you. This guy, well, one thing that's indicative of what Gaza is today is that he doesn't live there anymore. He's a academic living in the United Arab Emirates, teaching at a university. Last time I checked, I haven't talked to him in a little while, but he got out because it was very hard in that situation, especially with Hamas growing in power, to be your own person. I mean, if you're asking the question, why do people accept the level of murderousness and having this terrorist organization run Gaza? Some of it is some people sincerely believe in the message, which we can talk about, but it's the nature of terror. The nature of terror is to terrorize. And so we have seen in some polling, I'm not sure how polling is done in Gaza right now, but in some polling and some, anecdotal street interview sort of journalism, people saying, Hamas, what have you brought upon us? In other words, the argument that a lot of, let's say, Gaza dissidents make, not an argument you would hear, by the way, on the campus of Columbia University, which is truly an extremist stronghold.
Yeah.
But the argument you hear is, okay, Hamas, so you invade another country, you murder the grandparents, rape the women, and kidnap the children, bringing them back to your territory. What do you think is going to happen? Especially when the country you've invaded is, except for that day, much stronger militarily than you are, right? So a lot of people are saying, what was the point of this? Like, what are we getting out of this except death and destruction and chaos and the physical destruction of property and infrastructure and all the rest that's just going to have to be rebuilt. So I came out of my own sojourn in that conflict as, I guess you would say, kind of a supporter of Israel and a supporter of the idea that the Palestinians should have a country of their own. The only question that I have now after October 7th is, and this is the great question, right? If you were to withdraw from more territory, would Hamas and the other extremists follow you in to that territory and then use that as a launching pad against you? Right? That's the dilemma Israel faces, especially when we talk about, should Israel turn the West Bank over to the Palestinians and turn it into a state of its own? Yeah, ideally, of course. But we don't live in the world of ideals right now.
I was talking to someone yesterday, American Christian, who, when we brought up someone we know who's in the region serving in the military, his response was to say, we should stay completely away from there. Nothing good happens with being in the Middle East. And he said he was terrified of World War III. This was after Iran bombs Israel, and who knows what's going to happen next. It seems to me that guy would have had a very different reaction pre-Iraq War. And after that, I think now is just deeply nervous and skeptical of getting pulled into something it's impossible to be pulled back out of. Do you think that's, in terms of the American response, do you think the Iraq War is hanging over this?
Yeah, to some degree. I mean, nobody wants to see America on fruitless adventures in which American troops get killed. There are no American troops deployed on the ground, certainly. American military personnel are in danger in the sense that those who are on ships, for instance, or at bases. Remember, we have American personnel deployed in fighting still in Syria against, it's another aspect of the Middle East dysfunction. I totally understand what he's talking about. But let me say this about nuclear war. The chances of nuclear war are greater eventually on the Korean Peninsula or over Taiwan, obviously. Not probable, but plausible. I'm not sure we're going to get involved in a nuclear war in the Middle East. We can get involved in a very damaging war in the Middle East. The question comes, look, there are three vital regions of the world, according to U.S. national security and economic interests, right? East Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. Geopolitics, like nature, geopolitics abhors a vacuum, right? So if the U.S. withdrew from Asia, China expands. If the U.S. pulls out of Europe, Russia expands. If the U.S. pulls out of the Middle East, Iran expands. The nature of these totalitarian regimes is expansionist, right? They just keep eating and eating and eating whatever they can get. Now, the U.S. is a global economic power, and do you really want the rules of the international road being written by Russia, China, and Iran? These are the geopolitical concepts that you have to take into account. Now, you might come to the conclusion that, you know what, better not to be involved and whatever happens, happens. We still grow our own food here and we buy this from there and that from here and it'll be okay and people will still sell us stuff. The isolationist impulse is very tempting. I'm just not sure that American interests are served long-term by abandonment of the Middle East. I also think that, as we learned on 9/11, the Middle East can come to us, right? And it's not the nature of these regimes or terrorist groups to say, okay, that's enough. We're satisfied with your response. Thank you very much for your cooperation. Doesn't happen.
You mentioned Colombia. One of the things that has developed in evangelical Christianity over the past just couple of years is that there is this right now extremely online sort of young influencer base that's defending Hitler. Literally, there are debates going on online as to whether you really ought to correct young men in a congregation who are drawn to Hitler and to Nazi Germany and Holocaust denial, that sort of thing. We've seen Tucker Carlson interview a historian who's arguing that Winston Churchill actually was the bad guy in World War II.
Yeah.
And then you look at what's happening on many of the campuses that's coming from the opposite direction from the left. And what's happening?
Well, it goes back to the question of whether the internet was a good thing or a bad thing, and whether social media is a good thing or a bad thing. Remember the Facebook idea, the social media idea, the early mantras were that giving all human beings the ability to talk to all other human beings instantaneously without filtration or the cooling power of time, elapsed time, was a good thing. Now, people who have a slightly more tragic view of humanity and a deeper understanding of human frailty and human flaws said at the time, and certainly say today, well, I don't know if that's so great. Is that really such a great idea? Should we have this level of communication? Because bad people with malevolent intent, will always swamp the good people who are trying to have nuanced, complicated conversations. That's always where I start. When I think about this, it's like, was that a good idea? I don't know how you have a better sense of. I mean, I have a good sense of what's happening on Ivy League campuses and schools like the Ivy League. I don't have the same sense of what's going on in, as you said, extremely online right-wing spaces, even church spaces. It's very disturbing what you've said. And the only thing I know, I mean, this is a general rule, not a specific rule. The only thing I know to do is correct people's mistakes, even if it seems fruitless. Just let them talk. It's fine. They're idiots, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that we have to, the grownups in the room, I'm not talking about people who are chronologically grown up. I'm talking about people with a certain maturity and sensitivity to nuance and complication. We have to inject as much reality into conversations as we can. it seems like a losing battle right now because it's so much easier to make up a meme, and it's so much easier to attend the University of TikTok than it is to go to get a serious education and read long books about serious problems that have pre-existed your own existence, by the way.
Yeah.
That goes back to that point about Americans and our not distaste for history, but just lack of interest in understanding why things happen. Doesn't bode well for a healthy society. If you don't know what's happened before, you're not going to be able to understand what's happening now. Certainly, you're not going to be able to predict what's happening in the future. So I don't know. I mean, I just think like we've conducted an unregulated, unsupervised experiment. We're conducting an unregulated, unsupervised experiment on the brains of our young. It seems like a dangerous and bad experiment. I'm not sure. I like the internet as much as anybody. I like getting access to interesting articles on Christianity Today and every other place in the world. I like maps.
Mm-hmm.
I like the weather report. I like all kinds of things on the internet, but we're not doing well by our kids by letting them. Like I said, we're doing an experiment on their brains, and we don't even know the terms of the experiment.
But why is the kind of activism that we're seeing right now? You don't see "From the River to the Sea" being chanted at Texas A&M
No,
or at
I'm not sure it would work at Texas A&M.
I don't think it would work at Texas A&M. And so, why is the Ivy League particularly in such a state with this?
That's an interesting question. I can't say for sure. I would say that a lot of what we're seeing has to do with the particular makeup of faculty and a particular makeup of a student body. I mean, we can go into psychological answers all day long, but frequently what you need to spark something. And remember, at Columbia, maybe it's 200 or 300 kids who are the total activists on that
Mhm.
side. They just make a lot of noise, and a lot of people in the media are predisposed to give them the bullhorn because they think that they must be on the side of righteousness because they're protesting, and protesting is an American value, right?
Mhm.
I could sort of stream of consciousness vamp about various issues on these campuses, but I would say that the largest determinant, two large determinants of whether a campus is going to become this kind of place, the number of faculty members in the humanities who have influence over students and who share extreme viewpoints. And second, the number of, in particular, grad students from in this example, right? In this context, grad students from Middle East countries who are radicalized by Hamas and Hezbollah ideology. Like everybody on campus, they have a lot of extra time. You've been on
Hmm.
campus.
Yeah.
You know what
Yeah.
it's like. Um, but I think it has to do with, and then the third factor is leadership. It's just leadership. Again, going to people who are non-democratic and who are less interested in persuasion than in coercion, which defines one definition of the autocratic mentality. When you push the limits, when you break the rules of the university and you don't get pushback and you don't get punished, well, you just go do it more.
Mm.
The funniest part about this, I don't want to go on all day about this, but the funniest part to me is that the notion of civil disobedience, baked into the notion of civil disobedience, is that there's punishment for you have to pay a price. Otherwise, it's not disobedience. Martin Luther
Mhm.
King Jr. goes to Birmingham jail for his disobedience, right? That's the price you pay. There's something interesting going on in which the protesters who take over buildings or disrupt classes or who intimidate Jewish students are demanding not to be punished by the university. Right. And then the
Yeah.
universities very often say, okay, we're not going to punish you. We're not going to, punishment in this case means suspension for a year from school or paying a fine to like fix the window that you broke or whatever. It's not exactly 5 years in parchment or something, but they don't buy the theory that there's a price to be paid for showing your disobedience. And so it's almost like there's a kabuki quality to what's going on in these campuses. And then, by the way, if you look at, for instance, when he was still running the university in Gainesville, what Ben Sass did was that, okay, look, you can protest here, you can protest there, you could say this, you could say that, do whatever. If you break the following rules, which you've all agreed to by being part of this community, you're going to be suspended from school for 2 years. That's the punishment. It's on the books.
Mhm.
It's very interesting how lack of enforcement of previously universally recognized standards, laws, guidelines, et cetera, how that led to the climate you see on certain campuses today. I mean, the other thing, Texas A&M, naturally maybe more conservative student body drawn from a more diverse population. You know, the campuses of the Ivy League schools, and this is not to their benefit, and surveys have shown this, draw overwhelmingly from like the leftmost 10 to 20% of the population. Separate question, which we can't possibly answer today, is why does the progressive and, by the way, very secular left in this country align itself with Islamist theocratic movements?
Yeah,
Doesn't make sense.
That is a baffling question.
No. I mean, one of the baffling things to me is like if you're like a gay or transgender activist in New York City, it's common now to say free Palestine, support Hamas and not Israel. But when push come to shove, if somebody said to you, okay, in the next 24 hours, we're going to move you to either Gaza or Saudi Arabia, Iran, whatever, or Tel Aviv, I have a feeling that they know where they're going to be allowed to live and where they're going to get killed. It's just, everything's upside down. It's very hard to explain, as you know. That's your job to explain it to your listenership and readership in a coherent, interesting way. I'm not taking on that role.
Walker Percy argued in the 60s that the real religion of the American South was not Christianity, but Stoicism. And he was talking particularly about this at least aspired to sense of honor there that didn't work when it came to issues of racial justice. But it seems to me when we're looking at some of these figures that you talk about in the On Heroism book, that really is what makes them different from somebody else who might have been in the same situation. There is this sort of internal code of being able to act with honor or without honor. I mean, and many of these people, I mean, I think of John McCain was a church member, but and he and I talked about this. He was kind of awkward talking about religion, theology, those sorts of things, but he did have this strong sense of honor.
The man, I mean, I knew him pretty well. You knew him pretty well. Man he knew that there is right and there's wrong, and he knew when you were on the wrong side of that.
Do you think that's the way that these people were parented? Or is this something unique to military training? No. How does that happen?
Well, military training, look, one of the things that they get criticized for, and I really can't join into the criticism, is everybody says, oh, you know how terrible Trump is. You should run or you should go now. It's bred into them from the age of 18 or 21, whenever they go in, that the military is apolitical.
Yeah.
Right? And you could argue this is a unique situation and that demands a unique response, but I get it. I get it. The reason that the military, you know what's so interesting? Do you remember the book and movie 7 Days in May?
Yeah.
The assumption in popular literature and popular culture is always that if there was going to be a coup attempt in America, it was going to be the military. Some crazy generals are going to get hold of the bomb or something, you know. And it turns out in 2021 that it was military leaders who actually have read the Constitution. It's part of the job, right? Military leaders are the ones who are like guarding the guardrails, let's put it that way. Right? And saying, nobody ever thought that there could be it was not in the popular literature, the idea of a civilian coup, right? How would a civilian coup even happen? Well, we found out, but there was no notion of a civilian coup. These military guys, and by the way, you and I both know plenty of mediocre people who've served in the military, and you know, it's not getting an officer's rank or serving does not automatically make you God's gift to mankind. I want to be clear about that, but they adhere to codes of honor, selflessness, brotherhood. The thing, one of the many things Donald Trump didn't understand about the military is why anybody would go into the service where you would risk your life for $70, $90, $110, $120,000 a year, right? He once said, I mean, this is where this is how nuts this whole thing is. He had contempt for officers, including really heroic guys, right? And once General Joe Dunford, who was the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, left the room, and Trump said, that guy's really smart. Why did he join the military? Said this to other military people, by the way. That was the attitude. Like, if you're smart, why would you do this? And then somebody in the room said to him, just because they're messing with him at this point, he said, how much do you think General Dunford, then remember the top-ranking military officer in the land, how much do you think General Dunford earns a year? And Trump said, I don't know, 3 million, 4 million? And then he was told that it was, I think, at the time, $159,000 a year. Trump can't imagine this because he can't imagine service, right? He doesn't understand the concept of service. I mean, it's not there. It's not baked in. You could instruct him, but it doesn't take. And so the idea of John Kelly, Jim Mattis, Mark Milley, and so on, being able to relate to this person. These are men who put their lives on the line, sometimes got hurt, sacrificed so much. I mean, it's not unpleasant to be a general, but it's less pleasant to be a corporal or a lieutenant. Sacrificed so much, including ability to earn money, a lot of money, to protect our country. And they get nothing but contempt from him. Every time I talk about this, I'm surprised at where we are vis-a-vis this issue, especially. I don't understand it. Can you explain it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I could, but I could at least my theories, but it would take a long time.
Yeah. You're just trying to get out of my questioning.
Yeah.
I see your move. I see what you're doing here.
I'm wondering.
You can do I paid for this microphone, Mr. Goldberg.
Right, that's
right. I'm not answering your questions.
There's suppose that right now, as our listeners are hearing this after the election, suppose there's a Trump victory. Trump is now president-elect, 47th president of the United States. Not likely to be a Jim Mattis or a John Kelly or an H.R. McMaster or someone like that.
Oh yeah, McMaster's another good one. Yeah,
in the new administration. And so I'm wondering, I think there are a lot of people who face this question at a much lower level than whether or not there's going to be nuclear war with North Korea.
Yeah.
But the question of when is it best to be on the inside, working to make things better, keep bad things from happening, the way some of these guys that you profiled did. And when is it time to say, I can't be a part of that without being complicit in it?
In the national security structure, there's never a good time. No, there's never a good time to say, I can't be complicit in it. There's never a good time. Look, if Donald Trump wants you to be the Secretary of Education or the Secretary of Commerce, feel free to say no, right? I mean, it's like, I'm not going to carry out your policies. I'm not going to do national security. The president of the United States is a nuclear monarch, right? It's a democracy, except when it comes to nuclear weapons. The president has sole authority to deploy nuclear weapons. Okay? We need sane people around him. We need responsible people around the president of the United States. There's no good time to quit that. I really feel that very strongly. It's in the best interest of the United States. Is it going to be onerous? Yeah. Are you going to get fired in 6 months? Yeah. Then the next guy has to come and do it. Is it going to dirty your hands? Yeah. It's going to dirty your hands. Is it going to give you a migraine? Yeah. But you know what? I mean, think about it from the perspective parent of a young person who's in the United States military. Think about it from their perspective. Do you want good people commanding your young person? Do you want bad people? Do you want the good people trying to keep the White House within certain guardrails and certain lanes, or not trying? I feel very strongly about this, obviously. There's just no choice when it's a life or death. Here's the thing. You want somebody good running FEMA, right?
Yeah.
No matter what. And if somebody said to you, if your friend who is an expert on emergency management said, well, they want me to run FEMA because I'm actually the best person in the country, but I just can't stand that administration. I don't want to do it. You'd say, look, I understand your dilemma, but the question is, are lives going to be saved because you're in the job? If the answer is maybe, what choice do you have? Seriously, what choice do you have? I mean, I have in my religion a concept, the holiness of life trumps everything. Right. The saving of a soul is the most important thing. You could break any rule of Judaism. You could kosher rules and keeping the Sabbath rules. If there's a chance to save a life, and you have to extend that. That's why doctors who are religious can drive to the hospital on the Sabbath, because somebody needs them. And so I apply this religious principle to that, which is like, you got the skills. You could possibly intervene in a way that saves somebody's life or saves the planet, for that matter. You got to go do it.
Let's talk about media for a second.
Do we really have to? Do we have to? I don't speak for the media. I just want everybody to know that right now.
One of the things that our listeners now know, and we don't, as we're having this conversation, is essentially among the many things that will be revealed on the 5th of November, is whether or not the media platform of Theo Von and the Manosphere,
Mhm.
or the media platform of Call Her Daddy and the women's media platform that Kamala Harris is
Mhm.
more related to.
Mhm.
We have this gender gap that's
Yeah.
huge in of course in political polling, but also in terms of media platforms altogether. Is this a unique thing in American history, or has this always been more or less true?
I'm going to answer your question, but like a politician, I'm going to first answer another question that you haven't asked.
Okay.
Uh, let me answer your question by now. No. I was just thinking as you're talking about the gender gap. This is a very short observation, and it goes back to something we were talking about before. I don't understand why so many men find Donald Trump to be some kind of ideal of masculinity.
Mm.
Like, I find some of the generals and soldiers that we were talking about to be ideals of what a man should be in the world. I just don't get it. He's a big whiner who like avoided serving his country. I'm not sure where I'm not I'm not sure where how my reality is so different from the reality of men who think that Donald Trump is some avatar of true American masculinity. To me, American masculinity is Gary Cooper. It's that stoicism that you talked about. It's like,
Mhm.
take care of business, don't talk about it, don't whine, don't complain, be kind to people, be fair, ensure justice. Period. End of story. I don't know. I'm glad I'm not a media analyst because it's yet another category of human endeavor that I don't fully understand. I always think about this in terms, and I guess you do too. How do you, as a legacy brand that adheres to certain old standards, survive and thrive in an atmosphere in which everybody has theoretical access to the mass public, right? Look, on the one hand, before the internet and everything else, social media, podcasts, et cetera, before the internet, we in the media, and again, I hate talking about the media as one thing,
Yeah.
but we in the media were having a pretty nice dinner party, right? And we talk to each other, we talk to people, we decide what people hear about and what people don't hear about. Did sometimes a good job, sometimes a bad job, right? When the internet revolution happened, everybody had access to everybody else. That's a great thing. That's democracy. That's democratization, right? But what we didn't understand is the value, or what some of us saw, but others disagreed, the value of old fashioned journalism values, right? Like fact checking, like trying to get it right, like pausing until you have the information confirmed, reflecting the best arguments of somebody you might not like, not just caricaturing them as a whatever. And by the way, the filtration. I mean, I know gatekeeping is supposed to be a bad expression, but when I was younger and covering extremists, I remember in the McVeigh time, you
Mhm.
know, let's say you were a right wing extremist or a Communist Party sympathizer. You go out in the street and you hand out pamphlets, and 99.9% of the people ball them up and throw them away. Alex Jones, before the internet, was that guy standing in front of the IRS with a tinfoil hat,
Yeah.
telling people passersby that the Treasury Department put a bug in his head. Today, people like that have access to limitless audiences, and we wonder why reality is on the ropes,
Yeah.
right? I'm of two minds. One is that it's great that, what is it, Call Your Mother, what was that podcast, Call
Call
My
Her
Daddy,
Daddy. I'm
Call
not
Her
I'm not
Daddy.
exactly sure what that means, but it's
And Theo
apparently
Von,
a
yeah,
a
very
very popular
popular. Like,
podcast.
it's great. And how can I complain in democracy that Joe Rogan has millions of
Yeah.
listeners? I wish that Joe Rogan would be a little bit more responsible in dispensing facts, and I wish he would have a little bit more respect for hard-earned expertise, especially in medicine and the like. But whatever. Okay, I just, especially when you introduce AI and the ability for anyone in their den or their basement, the proverbial basement, to make sophisticated fakes of reality. I just worry that we can't have a democracy if we don't share a reality. And I think a little bit more filtration and a little bit of fact checking, et cetera, those go a long way to convince people of things that are actually true. Again, I fully stipulate that the dinner party that we were having was exclusionary,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I get it. And other voices couldn't rise within that framework of 3 national newspapers and 3 television networks and 1 radio network and 2 wire services, the whole thing, right? I get it. I get it. I just don't think like our societal response to those limitations has been the healthiest response we could possibly have. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Answered my question.
Yeah. One of the things that I hear often from our readers and listeners is the question, how do I know what media sources to trust or not? And these are not sort of your conspiracy
Yeah, I get it.
theory, somebody's controlling the weather to send hurricanes to Florida sort of mentality. These are reasonable people who really do want to be actually informed and are saying, I don't know. When someone sends me a link to the Epoch Times,
Yeah.
how are they supposed to know that this is Falun Gong or something like that? I mean, how do you know what to believe?
Well, one of the things about citizenship is that it's not passive. So, I mean, it's a lot of this is just on us. And I hate to use the expression do your own research, but part of it is that we don't advertise who we are or how we do what we do effectively, right? There's no lobbying group for people who are in their own imperfect ways trying to move reality into the conversation, right? But I think at a certain point, we have to tell people, whether they listen or not is another thing. But if it's coming, I'll give you only my beliefs, right? If it's moving across the Associated Press or Reuters, Newswire, it's probably true. It's not perfect, but it's probably true. If the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, or the New York Times are reporting it, it's probably true. Maybe it's decontextualized in a way that suits the ideological needs of the person who wrote it or edited, but it's probably true. If you're watching a news network and you're seeing some reporting, maybe it's decontextualized. Maybe there's a left bent to some of what's going on, but it's basically true. You've got to ask people like you, for instance, who know and who actually spend all day long marinating in it. What do you trust? The most common, it's a really common human urge, common human instinct to go to sources that confirm your biases or confirm what you'd like to hear, right? But one of the other things you could do as an active citizen is to actually inquire. How do you know AP, New York Times, whoever, the Atlantic? How do you know it's true before you publish it? What are the standards you use? I don't think there's any shortcuts here, and I think we're in a losing fight, honestly, because the people who, you know what, it's sort of like the battle between democracy and autocracy. We have rules that limit what we can do. I mean, if the U.S. went around poisoning people in Russia we didn't like, well, that'd probably be effective, but that's what Putin does. We don't do that,
Yeah.
right? Same thing goes here. If you're running a website and you have no morals and no journalistic training, no belief in adherence to standards, it's a lot quicker to push something into the bloodstream than it is if you're actually sitting there trying to figure out if it's true or not. Again, acknowledging that maybe it's not true and you're messed up. But I don't know. I mean, I know what I do, which is I can almost instantly look at a site of a newspaper, magazine, et cetera, and say, okay, I'm going to trust that result. Also, I'm a careful reader, and I know how to do these stories, so I can see where the shortcuts are being made, and I could see somebody who's done the assiduous work necessary to be truthful. But again, we work in this, and so we have an unfair advantage. It's a great question, and I wish I had. This interview is very frustrating because I don't have all the answers. I wish I had all the answers.
One of the things that extremists, right and left, will say is what we're trying to do is to move the Overton window, the sorts of things that can be discussed. So as we were talking earlier, it just wouldn't have been the case 10 years ago that there would have been evangelical Christians rebuking people for saying that Hitler was the good guy. Just would have never happened. You obviously are in charge of the most influential magazine in the country. How do you decide?
Well, thank you for that. I think you guys are, but whatever.
How do you decide what sort of a viewpoint you will platform and you won't? So, I mean, there's no way that you would publish Alex Jones arguing that the Sandy Hook shootings were a conspiracy. If Donald Trump wanted to write a piece or give an interview about why the election, in his view, was stolen, I don't think he would publish that.
Oh, I would do an interview.
Yeah.
But I would never move on from, I mean, I wish that, this is just a small point, but I wish that interviewers of Donald Trump would not move on to the next subject and would just say, on January 6th, you said X, and this is what happened. There's no proof that X happened. Where is your proof? Just over and over again. Just do it. Like, just ask him the question, right? I would totally publish a Donald Trump essay, but it would have to be subjected to a fact-checking process. And if our fact checkers couldn't confirm that the things that he's asserting are true, then we couldn't run it as is. We're not a resistance publication. Like, if Donald Trump says something true, or if he does something that one of our writers thinks is good policy, we'll say that. That's fine.
I suppose I'm not thinking so much about Donald Trump, but you wouldn't run an essay arguing that the Holocaust was overblown or something like that. So how do you decide look? By
the way, I wish that there were a math formula that you can then put on your website and say 3/4 of this and 1 cup of that equals. I think what it is there's a group of people who have here, just as you have at your place, many, many years of real world experience in judging truthfulness and morality of information, right? Mm-hmm. And we look every day at what is coming across the transom, what we're interested in, and we make judgments based on the sum total of our human experience, right? Along with the guidelines that we use as our North Star, guidelines that have been, in the Atlantic's case, around for almost 170 years. I try to hire good and decent people here, and I hope I try to, in my own flawed way, try to be a good and decent person. And it's hard. This is a hard thing because we are supposed to be the mandate of the founders of the Atlantic to be the magazine of the American idea. But of course, it's not just one American idea. America is the symphony of different ideas. And the way you build a healthy democracy is to have ideas argue with each other. This is why we argue so strongly for the rebuilding of a conservative party, right? Because the best way to have the best ideas rise is let them argue with each other. So we're a big tent, and we have a reputation, I think, compared to other magazines, as a bigger tent. But what I tell people is the idea of a tent, even a very big one, still has flaps.
Yeah.
And if you're reading something that is racist or misogynistic or denies known reality, like, these are not hard calls.
Yeah.
Right? But everything is a call. Right? I mean, there are people I know who believe that arguing against affirmative action is racist. There are people who believe that affirmative action is racist. Is that an argument that should be held outside our tent? I don't think so. I think we should put it in our tent. I think you could do it in a respectful, fact-based way. But abortion is another example. It's like, we just ran a piece today about what is the real truth of third trimester abortion. It's not something that you would think a quote-unquote left of center magazine would run, but it's a serious policy issue. And so there's no formula, there's no program, there's no algorithm that could tell me this is acceptable, this is not. I hate to say it, but you just try to use your brains that God gave you to the best of your ability. And by the way, we'll make mistakes. That's the other thing. And it's a remorseless atmosphere out there. People are always waiting for everybody in journalism and public life to trip up and make a mistake, but you can't be that fearful that you paralyze yourself and you don't serve your audience.
Last question. I normally ask people here, if you're stranded on a desert island the rest of your life, you can choose one book. Normally I say 5, but we'll limit it to 1 today. One book of the Hebrew Bible to have with you. What would it be?
The Hebrew Bible? You're not just this is not just a special for Goldberg, is it?
I mean, obviously, I'm not going to ask you to choose a New Testament book, but
your pretty good writing in that New Testament of yours there, Russell. Okay. I read it all. No, I appreciate it. Well, I mean, look, here's the thing. I know the answer. The answer is the Book of Psalms, because I carry the Book of Psalms with me. Like, I have a little tiny one that my eyeballs can barely see anymore because I'm not. But I carry the Book of Psalms with me. I try to dip in every day. Nothing gives you perspective like that.
And what is it about the Psalms particularly that speaks to you?
I love reading the Psalms because as a collective, they do for me what being high in the Rockies does for me, which say, yeah, most of the things I'm worried about aren't actually important. What a grand planet we live on. And I don't understand. You're not supposed to understand the mysteries of the Creator, right? But I know that something something that's beyond my ability to understand has happened here. And what mountains do, or something similar to mountain, what they do for me is they make me realize that I'm extremely small in a good way, and that my problems are even smaller. And when I read a psalm, how do I put this? I am reminded that I believe that God is present. I am reminded to remember that I believe that God is present. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that, I mean, this is maybe more theological than you were expecting from the editor of the Atlantic, but this is me. This is just me. And that's important. Cause like, here's the thing. And I just had a birthday. So that's why I'm thinking about my age so much. Something that I like to impart to, I don't know if they like it when I impart it, but something I like to impart to very young staff here, because I have staff who are less than half my age. I could literally be the age of their parents. And I say, remember that most things don't matter, right? Like if it's bothering you today, but if you ask yourself, is this in a year from now going to bother me? Or are you even going to remember it? Then it's okay to just move on and just walk humbly and know yourself and try to smile at people and try to understand that you're as flawed as the person you're mad at. And by the way, I'm like, you're not talking to a guy who has like mastered this. I'm not the Dalai Lama over here. I'm not even one millionth of the Dalai Lama. But you know, you try as you get older. And you know what? Keeping the book of Psalms, first of all, I'm a nervous flyer, so I'm always going to have a book of Psalms with me, by the way. But just keeping the Psalms with me, even if I don't open it for a week, really important to me. Really, really important.
Jeff Goldberg is the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. Thanks so much for being with us today, Jeff.
Thank you.
The Russell Moore Show is a production of Christianity Today. It's produced by Will Dawson. The associate producer is Mackenzie Hill. This episode was mixed by Kevin Morris with video production by Abby Egan. Theme music by Lennon Hutton. Eric Petrick and Mike Cosper are the executive producers of CT Media Podcasts, and Matt Stevens is our senior producer. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating and review to help more people find the show. Thanks for listening.